Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the third video in our series of tough symphonists. Symphonists who'll give you a real run for your money, who challenge your ears. And the three symphonists we're talking about today are Roberto Gerhard, Krzysztof Penderecki, yay, we finally got there, and Michael Tippett, yay, we finally got there. And the interesting thing about all three of these fellows is that they all wrote symphonies that are relatively approachable and symphonies which are relatively modernistic or avant-garde, but not in the same way, not in the same order in their lives, and not for the same reasons. And so it's going to be a very, very interesting little survey. And it's possible, this whole talk is possible because Chandos has very kindly given me permission to use samples from their catalog, and freely, which I am so thrilled about and so grateful for. I can't even begin to tell you. They were very, very kind about it. And we shall be the beneficiaries, you and I. So let's start with Roberto Gerhard. He's probably, well, he's the least known of the three. His dates were, let's see, 1896 to 1970. Now, Gerhard actually was a Spanish composer, a Catalan composer, and the fascinating thing about him is that he studied with all the right people. He studied with Felipe Pedrell, who was the teacher of Falla and Granados. He studied with Albéniz. I mean, he just had the right pedigree, and then all hell broke out with the Spanish Civil War and whatnot, and in the 1920s, I think it was, he went to study with Schoenberg. And boy, did that change the course of his career. He became a devoted modernist and avant-gardist, although he didn't start composing in that style immediately. It was a gradual process. And he wound up, because of the Spanish Civil War, as I just mentioned, he wound up in England, which is where he spent the rest of his life, only returning to Spain for vacations and things. But wow, did he become a fascinating composer. He did write music in that sort of Spanish-influenced, kind of Falla-esque style, although always with a modern slant to it. It was sort of Falla mixed with Stravinsky and, Bartók, people like that. But then when he started writing symphonies and concerti and those things, he turned entirely to the serial avant-garde. And I think his Spanish roots, his love of color, his enjoyment of rhythm, all of that saved him from becoming a dry-as-dust academic serialist. And actually, his symphonies are fascinating. They're marvelous to listen to just because he had such an amazing ear. And the more you listen to them, as with all this music, the more normal they sound and the more you hear in them. So they are tough. They are definitely tough, but they are not all that unrewarding. In fact, they're very rewarding. I mean, you want to listen to something that's not all that unrewarding. That's damning with faint praise. That was just my verbiage. Anyway, he wrote 5 symphonies, actually 4 numbered symphonies in the avant-garde style, and one earlier one that was his homage to Felipe Pedrell, his teacher. And so I really think we should start with a bit of that, and then we'll go all the way to the end of his career, to the 4th symphony. You can hear the unbelievable, really, change in style from one to the next. It's a fascinating journey that he took, and he was just a composer of great integrity and imagination. So the symphony Homenage à Pedrell is right here. It's on Chandos with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Matthias Bammert. And we're going to play a little bit of the finale, which is called Pedrelliana, appropriately. The finale, the Pedrelliana part, was for many years played separately. But this is the premiere recording of the complete symphony, all 3 movements of it. And my goodness, they're all worth hearing. It's absolutely marvelous. So let's listen to a bit of the finale. Here you go. So it's quite clear that we're dealing with a Spanish composer writing in a somewhat modernized and updated, but still recognizably Spanish idiom. And it's just lovely music, and you'll enjoy it like crazy. You certainly will. But then he started writing his numbered symphonies, and those are genuine serial expostulations. And I have to say, I have really been enjoying listening to them again recently. I really have, because, there's just good music and bad music, and there's good serial music and bad serial music. Gerhard knew what he was doing. He was really a fine composer in whatever style he happened to be writing in. And the serial works are no exception, but they're very serial. I mean, they do sound initially like some of that squeak bloop stuff that we used to all laugh at and hate from the 1960s, with the exception of the fact that there's something about the sonority, the rhythm, it sets it apart. It makes you want to keep listening, to dig in and see what it has to offer. Now, his last symphony is called New York, the subtitle, because it was commissioned by the New York Philharmonic, but the subtitle actually refers to a Lorca poem, a poet in New York, a poem which talks about, the cold, impersonal glass and steel loneliness, which was the, kind of ridiculous view of New York held by so many old world decadent Europeans who are trying to think of reasons why they should be happy about the dismal, falling apart, miserable places where they lived, especially during the Spanish Civil War, and why the New World was such a disappointment and such a letdown, even though they'd never been there. It's one of those. But that's not the point. It's a lovely poem. It's Lorca. Lorca was a great poet. And the symphony is inspired by that. So it is a deeply disturbing work, because it's a deeply disturbing poem, which you can go and read online if you're interested. I just want to play you a bit of the opening, and you'll get a sense for, how the music is going to progress and the kind of sounds that it makes. It really is fascinating, and it's in one movement. It lasts about 26 minutes. It's not going to, make you crazy if you want to give it a shot. So again, it's with the BBC Symphony Orchestra under Matthias Bamert on Chandos. They did a whole Gerhard series, 5 or 6 CDs worth, the Gerhard Symphony Edition, and with many of his other works attached, both his avant-garde works and his more traditional works. And it's a wonderful mix, just a wonderful mixture of stuff. I mean, for example, this one, the one with the 4th Symphony, has his Pandora suite, the ballet Pandora, which is one of the earlier pieces. And so they go marvelously together. So here's the opening of the 4th Symphony. Not easy. Tough. He was a tough symphonist, but a very good one. And so I recommend him wholeheartedly for those of you with a little bit of adventure in your veins. Next, Penderecki. What a nice guy he was. What an interesting composer. You know, we honored him at the Cannes Classical Awards, and his wife, Elżbieta Penderecka, who at that time sort of controlled all of the culture of Poland, you know, he was such a revered figure, arranged to bring a huge collection of artists to Cannes to perform his Seventh Symphony, the Seven Gates of Jerusalem. And that was just a wonderful, wonderful event. He was a very interesting guy because Penderecki began life, as many of you know, as a avowed avant-gardist when it really meant something in Poland to be writing that kind of avant-garde music. His iconic work probably was the Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, which is really scary music. And his first symphony was written in that style as well. After that, though, he wrote in 1970, his second symphony came out. It was subtitled The Christmas Symphony. And it wasn't Christmas as in, you know, Leroy Anderson Christmas. It was not da 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 dum bum bum ba da dum. No, it was much more serious than that. And the interesting thing about Penderecki is that his later work is easier to listen to, but not easier. It's still tough. He was very serious. And many of the late symphonies, or some of the late symphonies, there are 8 symphonies in all, are vocal works or include vocal bits. And they're generally tonal, but they can be extremely grim. Really, it's like Alan Pedersen, grim. And frankly, you know, grim tonal music is just as difficult as not so grim, completely atonal avant-garde tone cluster texture music, right? I mean, they're just two different ways of arriving at challenging or difficult music. So Penderecki is a tough symphonist, no matter how you slice it. He really is, even in his more tonal moments. But we had a very good time together in Cannes. And I remember when we gave him his Lifetime Achievement Award, he you know, gave a little speech, and he said that he was extremely pleased to be, you know, recognized for his stand against, he called, the sclerotic avant-garde, were his words. And I just thought that was a marvelous phrase. He was vehemently opposed to the academic serialist movement because he felt that it was an expressive nullity, which a lot of it actually was and still is. And so when he accepted the award, he took a lot of crap, basically, in the 70s, particularly. Nowadays, of course, everybody's writing tonal music again. But in the 70s, that was a big deal. And he was considered a sellout because he wrote music that was approachable. But he felt, as he told me, as is obvious, you didn't have to, you know, you can hear it for yourself, that he wanted his music to express something to people. And he couldn't do that making squeak, bloop, doodle sounds. I mean, squeak, bloop, doodle sounds can be fascinating, but they squeak and bloop and doodle. But if he wanted to express tragedy and sorrow and happiness and, you know, spiritual transcendence, well, squeak, bloop, and doodle wasn't going to cut it. So he changed accordingly, and that took a tremendous amount of courage. So I'm going to play you 2 bits. I'm going to play you first a bit of his first symphony. I love this symphony. This symphony begins with machine music, tick-tock, clock music, basically. And it's really, really cool. I mean, just the sounds of it are so cool. I remember seeing him conduct the New York Philharmonic. He did De Natura Sonoris, the nature of sound, which is another one of those pieces where he just uses instruments to create the most amazing textures and sonorities. You don't have to worry about things like development or coherence or thematic substance or any of that. It's just about noise and the different noises an orchestra can make. And the first symphony is, in some ways, sort of a summation of that tendency. It's just a wonderful piece. And we have, happily, a wonderful Naxos box. There's also another very good box on the Dux label that's quite fine. But this is easy to get. Of all of the symphonies except for 6, which was not included in this series. That was a later release. He completed it actually just before he died. His symphonies were not written in the order in which he gave them numbers. And 6 was the last one, basically. But anyway, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 discs of symphonies and other orchestral pieces with Antony Witt conducting. And as you all know, Antony Witt is one of the great conductors out there. In whatever he's doing, he's usually pretty terrific at it, especially big choral works where he's just marvelous. But here's the opening of the first symphony. This is just so, the first 2 minutes of this are so cool. Here it is. And next, wasn't that cool? Wasn't that just great? I wanted to play a bit of the seventh. The seventh is the Seven Gates of Jerusalem. He only gave it the number 7 later. He actually wrote it sort of as a cantata originally, then decided, what the heck, it's a symphony. This is a very cool piece, and I was so privileged to hear it conducted live by him and arranged by his wife in Cannes, and it's quite a thing. It really is. I do have to tell you one story about it, though. It's really very funny. The Polish Ministress of Culture was invited to come, and because I was the chairman of the jury of the Cannes Classical Awards, I had to have lunch with her. And as it turns out, my mother was also around because she was visiting my sister in Milan. My parents were there, and my other friends. And so my mother joined us for this lunch, and my dear friend, Herr Dr. Serlenmeyer-Eller, who was at that point one of the German representatives, the German representative of the Cannes Classical Awards. He had been the editor of Phonoforum, and anyway. So we had this lunch, And the woman running the award, who represented the MEDEM organization, which hosted the award, was just the most officious person in the world. She was a riot. She was one of those bowing and scraping, So I was seated next to Madame le Ministre. And Madame le Ministre, when she got off the plane, was loaded. I mean, loaded. I mean, she had obviously had a few too many. And she came sort of dribbling into the lunch and plonked herself down next to me. And she started talking in Polish, and sometimes in German, and sometimes in Poman or Jurlish, whatever mixture was coming out. It was kind of hard to tell. I knew that it was about Penderecki, and I had to sit there and nod and listen to her. And when she was ordering, we had this woman sitting there running, who represented the organization, talking to the waiters. Madame le Ministre will have the filet de boeuf de côtelette Meunière Bernaise, It was unbelievable. And she had wine, lots of wine. And my mother and my best friend there, Dr. Meyer-Eller, were sitting across laughing at the whole thing. I mean, they were telling jokes. I had to keep a straight face. I mean, they thought the whole thing was hilarious because I was trapped talking to this woman about Penderecki's Seven Gates of Jerusalem. And at one point, Penderecki invented this instrument that appears in this piece like tubophones or something it was called. It's like big plastic industrial tubing, and you hit the ends of the tubes with ping pong paddles, and they go pop, 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 but somewhat pitched, like that. And she's explaining to me these tubophone thing, and she's going and like spitting all over me and all over my lunch. And my mother is there just laughing her guts out. And my friend is chatting with my mother and he's laughing his guts out. And I was like, oh, God, get me out of here. But the concert went off splendidly. And, apparently everybody was quite happy with it. And so was I. So I'm going to play you the opening of the Seven Gates of Jerusalem. It's such a fabulous opening. Oh, boy, this is powerful stuff. It's really great. You understand when you hear it exactly why he returned to some measure of tonality in his later works, because this makes quite the impression. Was, by the way, a real master of choral writing. I mean, we know this. We know this from Utrania and the St. Luke Passion and, all of his avant-garde choral works as well. I mean, never mind The Devils of Loudun. Ooh, boy, is that fun. That's a terrific piece. So, he was a master at manipulating huge choral masses. And this is just a wonderful work. So that's Penderecki. And he passed away just 2 years ago now. In spring of 2020, after a remarkable career, and just a terrific guy. So I'm so happy to talk to Penderecki to talk about Penderecki and to him, Tough Symphonist number 2. Now, number 3, Michael Tippett, another composer who I had the great good fortune to get to know when he performed The Mask of Time in Boston. He invited me over to have lunch with him and witness the event. Boy, was that a hoot. And that is, Tippett is an acquired taste. He is definitely a tough symphonist, even though his early symphonies, the first 2, are rather approachable, but they are relentlessly contrapuntal and extremely tricky rhythmically. The premiere of the Second Symphony was under Adrian Bolt. It was famously a disaster. The orchestra broke down because the concertmaster had insisted on rebowing the violin parts, and everybody got lost. It was a horrible, embarrassing event. The First Symphony is inspired. Tippett's symphonies generally are inspired by the example, not the music, the example of Beethoven. That is, they express this sense of struggle and a certain turbulence, and as well as a strictness of form, which he began to sort of loosen up later in his career. But the First Symphony, I think, is just a lovely work. It doesn't get played very often because the finale is this gigantic fugal thing that just sort of peters out to nothing at the end. I actually find the ending to be quite effective, but it's not going to be a happy moment in the concert when it sort of just stops, sort of, as once this wonderful fugue is all going like crazy. It's really a cool piece, though. And the best Tippett cycle by far is Richard Hickox's on Chandos. And this version of the First Symphony is coupled also with just about the best version out there of the piano concerto with Howard Shelley. It's as good as the Ogden Davis version. And I just love this symphony. I'm playing the bit from the end of the first movement exposition. And it gives you a contrast, a wonderful contrast between that sort of rangy, rhythmically intricate counterpoint, which most of the thematic substance of the movement is sort of based on, and this cadence theme where all of a sudden the music just blooms in this beautiful, beautiful lyrical moment that's so English sounding. It's such a fabulous moment. It's absolutely glorious. You hear it twice, which is wonderful because there's a recapitulation. Thank God you get to hear it twice. And it anchors the music so wonderfully, and it's just a wonderful moment. It's very, very emblematic of Tippett's style, where no matter how crazy and rangy it gets, there will always be moments of just this lyrical ecstasy. There's no other way to describe it, that are so affecting. So let's listen to a little bit of the First Symphony. That was the Bournemouth Symphony and Richard Hickox. But now we're going to do some later stuff. Now, Tippett's Third and Fourth Symphonies are really nutty. The Fourth Symphony was the one that was commissioned by the Chicago Symphony and Schulte, and it has the heavy breathing at the beginning, which is technically written for a wind machine, but in the Schulte recording they used someone actually breathing because it's supposed to be this sort of birth image thing. But in his later music, Tippett abandoned conventional forms, along with tonality, basically, and wrote music that was archetypal of its kind. In other words, it was almost Brucknerian in structure. He would just alternate blocks of thematic material, and that material represented certain emotional states, and even wrote what they were. In the Fourth Symphony, he writes, power, and it's the brass blasting away, and lyric grace, and it's the strings doing their thing. He just developed this sort of, there was the singing music, and there was the angry music, and there was and the pieces consist of that kind of stuff in this block-like arrangement in single movements most of the time. The Triple Concerto is a big, long single movement. The Fourth Symphony is a big, long single movement. There's also the Rose Lake, the big symphonic poem he wrote at the end of his life, which is beautiful and badly needs a good new recording, which is like that as well. And usually at the heart of these pieces, again, there's just this wonderful lyrical outpouring. The Third Symphony is a vocal symphony, and it is based clearly conceptually on Beethoven's Ninth. Yes, the Ninth. You got it. And it's an amazing piece in a way. It's in two big, gigantic movements. And instead of a chorus in the finale, you have just a single soloist, soprano soloist, who sings blues numbers, kind of atonal blues numbers. Well, they're not totally atonal, they're bluesy. And the words are Tippett's own, and Tippett as a setter of words is just a piece of work. He really is. First of all, the texts he set and wrote himself were usually kind of crazy. This one, let me give you an example of the text, which is really going to be, nowadays it would not be considered sufficiently woke. In Tippett's day, it was just plain embarrassing because it was woke, which shows you how things change. It's unbelievable. I found the beautiful moronic child. His happy eyes shone bright. He said nothing, for his mind is lost. I gave him milk and kisses. I found the man grown to a dwarf. After the circus, in his tent, he said, so many take me for a doll. I gave him milk and kisses. Well, it's all about compassion. It's beautifully about compassion, but the words? Where's the part about things about, genitalia flapping and sweaty armpits, and it's just got, it's unbelievable what's in here. It really is. And you just have to put up with it. But the moment before the voice enters is quite extraordinary because Tippett is making a statement. And here is the statement. Get it? The statement. Yeah. It's kind of like when people stick a survivor from Warsaw, into the Ninth in order to make a statement. Well, Tippett wrote his own, and good for him. So Tippett is definitely one of our tough symphonists, but he was a major personality. a serious personality with a point of view and very interesting. And since he's passed away, his music seems to be, slipping somewhat into oblivion, which is a pity because the best of it is among the really great 20th century works. I'm not sure all of the symphonies are going to make it, but, they deserve to be heard and we need to sort it all out ourselves. He was into the number 4. He wrote 4 symphonies and, 4 concerto things, more or less. Didn't he write? There's the triple concerto and the concerto for orchestra and the piano concerto and isn't there another one? Yeah, the concerto for double string orchestra. Yeah, it makes 4. And there were 4 piano sonatas and 4 string quartets, or maybe 5. I think it's 5 of one thing. He actually broke the number 4 in one of them, in one of those series. But there's this really interesting body of music there. And it is all tough music. It's rangy music. I've used that word before. It kind of hangs out in ragged pieces. It's not clean and elegant and polished. It's music of struggle. Very, very interesting as a result. And I think profoundly meaningful. His opera, The Midsummer Marriage, is a flat-out masterpiece. I saw it in San Francisco when I was, in grad school, and it was just marvelous. That's how I met him, actually. I wrote to him afterwards, and he wrote back. He was just a terrific guy, an absolutely terrific guy. So those are our 3 tough symphonists: Roberto Gerhard, Krzysztof, however you pronounce it, Penderecki, and Michael Tippett. They deserve your time and attention, and it will be amply rewarded, I assure you. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks so much for joining me.